You have been lied to your entire life. Not by accident, not by mistake. The Kremlin, one of the most photographed buildings on Earth, has a secret that Russia's own historians openly admit, but nobody ever talks about. For over 200 years, those famous red walls, they were white, completely, unmistakably, buildingly white. And here's the thing that makes this even stranger. Nobody decided to paint them red. Nobody ordered it. Nobody made a decree. The Kremlin just slowly stopped being white, and the world forgot it was ever anything else. This is a story of how the most powerful fortress in Russian history changed color, and what that change reveals about power, propaganda, and the way history gets quietly rewritten right in front of our eyes. Let's start with something that surprises almost everyone. The Kremlin was built by Italians. In the late 1400s, Ivan III hired architects from Milan, some of the best fortress builders in the world, to construct a new Kremlin from scratch. The old wooden one had burned down. Again, Russia needed something permanent. The Italians mastered used red brick, the same red brick they used back home. And if you want to see what the original Kremlin looked like, you don't need to visit Moscow. Go to Milan. Look at the Sforza castle. Same walls, same towers, same brick. And crucially, those Italian fortresses were never painted. The brick was the finish, the natural red-brown of fired clay exposed to the elements. So for its first 200 years, the Kremlin was exactly that. Raw red brick, no paint, no whitewash, just stone and time. But then something changed. The first evidence we have of the Kremlin being white comes from a surprising source, a religious icon. Painted in 1668, the icon, Praise of the Vladimir Mother of God, shows the Kremlin clearly and unmistakably in red color. But the official paper trail starts in 1680. A royal document, a memo submitted directly to the Tsar, raises a question that seems almost absurd today. The Kremlin walls have not been whitewashed. Should we whitewash them or leave them as they are? Think about what this means. Someone had to ask, which means it wasn't obvious, which means whitewashing the Kremlin wasn't tradition. It was a choice being made in real time. The Tsar's answer came back simple: whitewash them, and so they did. From the moment, for nearly 2 centuries, every painter, every traveler, every photographer who visited Moscow saw the same thing: a white Kremlin, gleaming in the summer, ghostly in winter fog, unmistakable against the Moscow River. One French writer who visited in 1828, 15 years after Napoleon burned the city, described being moved to sadness by the white walls. He wrote that the fresh white paint covering Napoleon's damage made the Kremlin look too young, like it was hiding its scars, like the white was erasing history. He had no idea how right he was. Here's where the story gets genuinely strange. Nobody decided to stop whitewashing the Kremlin. There was no decree, no political decision, no official change of policy. It just stopped. The first photograph ever taken of Moscow dates to 1842. You can see the Kremlin in it, pale, whitewashed, barely standing out from the winter sky. But look at what happened over the next 40 years. 1856, white, freshly repainted for the coronation of Alexander II. 1866, still white, but the paint is starting to peel in places. 1880, visibly faded, large patches of bare red bricks showing through. 1884, here's the strangest photo of all. The walls are half bare brick, half white, but the battlements, the pointed tops of the walls, have been freshly painted white. Red walls, white teeth. Nobody who saw this thought it looked right, but nobody fixed it either, because by the 1880s something had shifted. Not in policy, just in will, in attention and in money. The Kremlin was enormous, the upkeep was so expensive, and slowly, gradually the decision to maintain the white was just not made. By 1909, the walls are almost entirely bare red brick again. Some towers still hold their white paint, the water tower especially, which was apparently whitewashed later than the rest and so lasted longer. But the transformation is nearly complete, not because anyone wanted red walls, just because nobody bothered to keep them white. And then there is the towers, And this is where the story gets generally complicated, because the towers didn't follow the same timeline as the walls. Take the Spasskaya Tower, the one with the famous clock that you see on every New Year's Eve broadcast in Russia. In 1778, a painting shows something remarkable. The walls are completely white, but the Spasskaya Tower is already red, with white decorative details. Then Napoleonic invasion happens. Moscow burns, the tower is damaged, repaired, and in the early 1800s it's white again. Then in the late 1860s, red again. The Spasskaya and Nikolskaya towers were essentially treated separately from the walls. They were repainted, changed, updated based on whoever was in charge, whatever was fashionable, what had just been damaged. The Nikolskaya Tower on the opposite side of Red Square was blown up by Napoleon in 1812. Half of the tower was destroyed. It was rebuilt in the Gothic style, painted red. Then, in 1883, someone whitewashed it again. Then, during the Russian Revolution in 1917, it was hit by artillery fire. When they repaired it in 1918, they painted it red, and it's been red ever since. The towers tell a messier, more honest story than the walls. There was never a consistent vision, never a master plan, just decisions, reversals, neglect, war, repair, the chaos of real history leaving marks on stone. Here's the irony that ties everything together. The Kremlin turned red, truly officially, intentionally red under the Soviet Union, but not because of ideology, not because red was the color of communism and revolution. It turned red because of a renovation in 1947. Moscow was celebrating its 800th anniversary. Stalin wanted the city cleaned up, and when workers arrived at the Kremlin walls, they found 60 years of peeing, whitewash, bare brick, water stains, and grime. They had a choice: repaint it white or clean and restore the natural brick. They chose the brick. And suddenly, the Kremlin was red, the same color as the Soviet flag, the same color as the revolution, the same color that would become inseparable from the image of communist power. But here's what nobody talks about. They didn't just leave the brick, they actually painted it red. To this day, the Kremlin walls in many places are not natural brick color. They are painted a specific shade of red, the natural red Kremlin that symbolizes centuries of Russian power and Soviet might, painted in 1947. So here's what we actually learned today. The Kremlin was white for at least 200 years, from the 1680s to the 1880s. That's longer than the United States has ever existed. It went from white to red not because of a decision, but because of neglect. Paint peeled. No one repainted. The brick came back. And then, in 1947, the Soviet state looked at those bare brick walls and decided that red was right, red was powerful, and red was permanent. They painted it red, and then they kept painting it red ever since. The most iconic symbol of Russian power, the image that appears in every news broadcast, every documentary, every political speech about Russia, is a building whose current appearance was essentially created by accident and confirmed by a post-war renovation. History isn't always grand decisions and turning points. Sometimes history is just paint that nobody bothered to renew, and eventually the world forgets it was underneath. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, History in Ruins, so we can uncover together more ruined history.